Okay, sir.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Let's start the function with a prayer. Let me invite Anna Elsa Vagis of second year MA English for the prayer. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Vivek. വിനയമുള്ളൊരു ഹൃദയമിന്നിൽ മെനഞ്ഞിടേണമേ ദൈവമേ, അനുദിനം തവ ഭാവമിന്നിൽ വിളങ്ങിടാൻ കൃപയേകിടൂ. ദിനം ദിനം ഞാൻ ദൈവമേ മറന്നു പോയി നിന്ദാനങ്ങൾ, സ്വാശ്രയത്തിന്നികളിയായി സ്നേഹവാനെ ക്ഷമിക്കണേ. ദിനം ദിനം ഞാൻ ദൈവമേ മറന്നു പോയി നിന്ദാനങ്ങൾ, സ്വാശ്രയത്തിന്നികളിയായി സ്നേഹവാനെ ക്ഷമിക്കണേ. വിനയമുള്ളൊരു ഹൃദയമിന്നിൽ മെനഞ്ഞിടേണമേ ദൈവമേ.
Thank you, Anna. The Research and Postgraduate Department of English, Zamorin College, in association with Internal Quality Assurance Cell, is conducting a series of online lectures titled LITmus Talks. The inaugural talk session of this series was conducted by Sri Sajay KV, Assistant Professor of Government College Madapalli, who is a noted critic and writer, and he shared his ideas about the topic Reflections on Literature, which was encouraging to all of us on our path of literature. The second talk session in this series was conducted by Dr. Anita Ramesh K., former head of the Department of English, Zamorin Guruvayurappan College. She talked about acts of reading, a brief sketch. Her session was encouraging to all of us readers, and her views on reading were expressed beautifully. Today, in the third talk session of this series, we have with us Sri Soni Somarajan in conversation with Mr. Aswin Vijayan, Assistant Professor of the Department of English, on the topic of making first contact a conversation. We are most delighted to have both of them in conversation for our curious minds. Now, I would like to invite our beloved head of the Department of English, Dr. Rekha K., to deliver the welcome speech. Over to you, Rekha, ma'am.
Thank you, Vivek. Good morning and welcome all. This morning we have all gathered round a well-known poet. And this is the first time in the series that we got a poet as guest to address the audience. I assure you, sir, that you've come to the right place in this morning. The department is very rich in poetic capacities. Two of our faculty are working their way up as poets. We have Dr. Arya Gopi, who is very much into the field and has received around 46 awards for poetry, including Kerala Sahitya Academy Kanagasri Award. Then Sri Aswin Vijayan has also produced and contributed in a large way to poetry. And of course, for all your information, I would like to confess that I have such aspirations too. But I won't be so adventurous as to read a single line even to my colleagues. Even the sessions have become offline now, so they are all present in the department. I won't read a single line even to my colleagues as I have certain fears. Though the department has three doors, I really fear a stampede. There are only 11 staff, 11 teachers in our department, and we have three doors, but still I fear a stampede. And I will be solely responsible for all that happens. To read. I admire all that upon you. And
Hello, ma'am.
Is there any
Hello, Rekha, ma'am. We lost you. That-
who in my completion of my graduation, they have joined us. They found the time to join us. I'm really happy that they are with us. And last but not the least, I extend a warm welcome to all the faculty and students of this college and the English department who have lent colors and life to this gathering. And they're all ears to listen to our guest who is about to address us. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rekha ma'am. I take this moment to thank our most respected principal and former head of the Department of English, Dr. Rajini B., who already gave her presidential address in the inaugural function of LITmus Talks. Thank you, Rajini ma'am. Before we move on to the main event, I invite Agila Subramanian of second year MA English to introduce our resource person for the day, Sri Soni Somarajan. Over to you, Agila.
It's indeed a privilege and honor to have Mr. Soni Somarajan as our resource person. He is a passionate writer, editor, and content consultant who has proved that nothing can beat his determination and immersed himself in the world of literature. His poetry and writings have featured in Anthologist magazine's newspaper, including the Bombay Literary Magazines, Northeast Review, Kitab, the Bangalore Review, New Indian Express, Madras Courier, etc. His poems are forthcoming in two anthologies, Witness, Indian Poets, Define Dissent, and the Yearbook of Indian Poetry in English 2020 to 2021. His poems have been published as a book titled First Contact, in which he has sprinkled his thoughts across 64 poems that became a memoir of his life, which was published by Red River in 2020. And also, there are so many autobiographies written in prose. His stories and poems were published in various English publications. He also took part in a poetry seminar of Iowa University in America in 2013. He also pursued his passion for photography. We are so pleased to have you, sir. Now, I invite Soni sir and Aswin sir to have an interactive session. I warmly welcome both of you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you so much. And Soni, let me begin by saying how grateful I am that you have accepted our invitation and decided to join us today. It's a day off, but let us have some talk about poetry and about your work. I hope you will enjoy being here as much as we enjoy having you over. Let me begin by reading a poem.
Thank you, Aswin, for having me here.
Yeah.
And thank you to the management of the college and the department, the teachers, and the students also. I'm sure they have everything this too. So thankful and grateful for having me here today morning. And I realized yesterday that I have a very deep connection with your college, which of course I will talk about later in my conversation with Aswin sir. Yeah.
That would be lovely, Soni. That is a story that I am keen to hear about. Let us begin with a poem from First Contact. Soni writes, "We must begin with offerings to a power elephantine, for memory alone is what we possess. It's amusing, there's no evidence to show for it. A vapor of stories, things ephemeral, these eyes have seen, the lips I have kissed. Every day is a degree of loss, the slow drip, a failing light. The trail's half-eaten and time calls for a truce. Let's cut our losses. Love, the fulcrum of memory, you and me, custodians of a fading past. Let's bear witness to each other's stories. So we are here to bear witness to each other's story, and I would like you to, this poem in so many ways contain all of the themes that you are exploring throughout the collection. It is a sort of a classic opening to a collection, but it's also something that foreshadows the ideas of memory, ideas of a light and photography that you bring into many of your poems. And but I would like you to start talking to us about your early life, the beginnings. We must begin at the beginnings, right? So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the beginnings of Soni Somarajan, the person, and also Soni Somarajan, the poet.
So I'll just say a bit about this poem itself. We must begin. So you know that as we have grown up and we have seen, uh, whenever we start something, we pay homage to Lord Ganapati, right? And so I was like thinking about it and what is it that I could write as a very secular poem from that concept. And then I tried to connect it with when I say power elephantine, you obviously know what the reference is to. And then when you look at it, an elephant has what you call very powerful memory too. And that is what I needed to write this collection. And when I say the degree of loss, uh, memory is a very tricky customer. Uh, it can even tell you lies. It can tell you the truth and it can also tell you lies. Because there is at some point, there is a very fine line between imagination and memory. And so often you have to uh, wait for all the grace to come to you so that you are able to tell the truth as much. But even if you are telling lies, it's interesting, right? So, yeah. So then going from there, as far as my childhood is concerned, uh, what was uncommon about it? What was uncommon about it is the fact that all of the children grow up at home, and but by the age of 10, I was sent to a, a residential school because my parents had big dreams for me, and they thought that I should have a good education, even if it meant that I would be separated from them for what is possibly the rest of the life, because I would be spending the rest of the years in school, and then from there I'm going out into life, isn't it? So eventually it meant that I was separated. There was this voluntary separation at the age of 11. But before that, if I try to look at the origins of creativity, uh, I don't remember, kind of writing poetry or anything similar to it at the age of 5 or 6 or being precocious about it. Uh, but of course, I remember if we look at creativity as not just poetry and writing, but creativity as the ability for ideation, I would say that I had this ability to form new words for things around me. So I remember at the age 5 and 6, I had this word for a frog. I would say the word chamata. I don't know where it comes from. I have no idea what it is even today. But I think my little mind somehow tried to make sense of all the sensory inputs I was getting from the particular aspect of the frog, and I made a word out of it. And then for my father's nameplate on his uniform, Air Force uniform, the nameplate, I had a word for it. I used to call it a CDS. I don't know why. So my father still talks about it, but I had this very funny word, and I don't know whether you call it creativity of trying to form words of our own. So that is something that I would say comes even remotely to the possibility of creativity. But then going on to joining Sanic school at age 11, the interesting part about it is that it was a Nehruvian socialist experiment to have the children of the common man come and study or get a public school education. So in those, and this was particularly with the intent that these little kids would go on to become or join the military. In those times, the military was most of the young men who were recruited or became officers in the armed forces were largely from the North Indian states and also from the very higher aristocratic families. So how could the officer cadre of the armed forces become open to the children, the common man? So that was that experiment. But the interesting thing is that those schools were started by the defense minister, the then defense minister of India, Krishna Menon, and Krishna Menon is an alumni of Guruvayurappan College. So I was going through the history of Guruvayurappan College, and this was one fact that all that I am today came from that man in the terms of that school that was set up, and that mind had studied at your college in that very setting that all of you students are sitting right now, and we are having this conversation. See how it comes all full circle. And these are the things that I feel that we should celebrate. These connections make so many things possible. So the school was also the place where I became the daydreamer. And that was a place where, of course, your parents are not there. Especially helicopter parenting was absent then. So you had no parents hovering around you to see what you were doing. But I literally took advantage of the atmosphere of freedom, though it was beset with discipline. But it was about being thrust into taking responsibility for yourself, but which also meant that when you take responsibility for yourself, you could take so many decisions for yourself. And while I'll also say that the connection comes deeper when I say that this socialist experiment of letting common man's child go to a public school actually ended with Aswin's school, which is the Navodaya Vijayan. So the connection is even more, kind of emphatic here. But having said that, as far as poetry was concerned, I did not write poetry in school at all. And of course, I remember my English teacher was very supportive of me. And there was this Ray Bradbury's science fiction short story called The Foghorn, which we had to study in CBSE 12th standard at that point of time. And I remember that I had written an answer for a question that he had posed in a class test at that point of time. And it related to this story. And after everyone's answer books were handed out, mine was given to me last. And when I asked for it, he said, wait a moment. And he began to read the answer that I had written to the question. You see, teachers can change people's lives. And I still feel that little incident was a testimony to the power of teaching, the power of a teacher, and how much of a responsible position it is.
It's so nice to hear about all of these connections, and also about the beginnings. Would you keeping in tone with all the things that you have already mentioned, would you like to read us The Day Communism Died? It is one of my favorite poems from the entire collection.
Come again, which one was that?
The Day Communism Died.
Yes.
If you if you may,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Yeah. So this was a poem that was first, of course, it's part of the book, but before that, it was published in the Madras Courier last year. The day communism died. Communism died. Let words distance themselves, like my widowed grandmother. Wear the simplest of cotton, eat the thinnest air, and depend on money orders. The family and anyone who counted discussed the ayes and nays of a cremation as grandfather's body lay beside a flickering lamp, never lit while he was alive. Till to it seems the room holds its breath, unable to mount the one who built it. The periods of hush broken often by a sudden wail, sometimes a staccato. In death, history for all manifests, a betrayal of the departed, the comrade's faith, preserved carefully once now undone. The public washes away the private, rendering everything pointless.
Could you tell us a little bit more about this poem, especially in the context of how, how you, especially in this collection, translate memory into poetry? In that sense, everything is translation in poetry. And
Yeah. So I have this distinct memory of my parents. We were in Hyderabad at that point of time. My father was working there, and this is the thing that we were summoned to back to family home in Kerala because my grandfather had passed away, and I was his favorite, but I never got to spend so much time with him. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I was his favorite. And so then again, somebody I knew. So when I get back there, this person doesn't exist anymore. And as far as I remember, he was someone, he was a staunch communist. And he was someone who was communist to the point that he wouldn't allow even ceremonial lamps, prayer lamps, to be lit in the house. So he was that kind of a person, was very strict with his ideals. And the fact that after he passed away, the ritualistic cremation, the ceremony of it was, and the fact that there was a lamp burning next to his dead body was something that presented a certain predicament to me when I thought about it later. So I wanted to present how often a person's ideology or even a person or his belief or her belief are often sometimes sacrificed in the convenience of what we call conventional propriety. And that is how this poem came to be. So this also, when we say that whatever we insist upon, whatever we are strict about, whatever we hold fast, whatever beliefs we have, are ultimately consigned to history as we pass on and the next generation takes over. And it can seem pointless at times, and I wanted to show how someone probably maybe 3 or 4 or 5 generations, we don't even know their names, who in their time, at that particular point in history, did significant things, but are so often rendered insignificant by the relentless wash of time. That's it. Ashwin?
So I hope there is an issue in internet. So please, sir.
Yeah, I wait.
So just 2 seconds.
Hello.
Ashwin, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but some network trouble on my part. It is so nice to hear you talk about your experiences, your way of, you know, go, dealing with memory and translating it into poetry. Now, let me ask you something more particular to the book. That something that we see as we read through the book that any reader would notice is the way that you have used the timestamps and the very specific geolocation you have marked. If it is the day communism died, it is something that you have marked it out as Manjaditara, 1979. So we get a sense of a biography developing as we read through the poem. So
Yeah.
could you tell us a little bit more about the choice that led you to make that decision?
Yeah. It was not very apparent at the beginning when I started writing this book that it would become a sort of a memoir. Of course, I wanted to write about these strong memories, the memories that are really strong in my mind. I wanted to kind of discuss them in poetry. I wanted to write about them. I wanted to kind of dissect them. I wanted to go deeper into them by giving it much more thought and see what these memories, why they held so much value for them. So it was only later because all these poems were not written in the order that they appear in the timeline of the book. They were written, maybe the first poem was written probably towards the middle of the entire writing journey itself. I remember the poems on Sainik School in the second section were actually written at the very end of the writing journey. So it was only later that I got the idea that if I ordered these memories, it would become like a memoir wherein you are reading along a timeline. And then I decided for some of the poems, I had already mentioned these little markers, that is wherein I would mention where the place is and the year is. And that would become a certain stamp of sepia on the poem itself, giving it a certain periodicity. And it was also, you would know, like what was important to me. Manjanitra is my maternal home. I mean, it's maternal ancestral house. And it has so many memories for me. And though, of course, I was off and on, first coming only on vacations during my father's, whenever he got the annual leave. Then later, when I was in Sainik School, it was during the vacations that I could come. Of course, I don't live there now. I mean, like, that is no longer my home because we constructed our own new house. But the thing is that this place became is like my cradle, is my cradle of memories. And I felt that it was a placeholder for each of my poems. And that is the reason why you have this year stamps, as I would call it, and also the geographical tag also. And it also helps even if that was not there, I'm pretty sure the reader would know what I'm trying to talk about. But this gives it a certain method to the madness. and gives a certain order to the memory. So we are talking about our first memory, our earliest memory, and then we are going forward to the day-to-day. So that's how I did the stamping, the time stamping, or the date stamping, or the year stamping that's been done in this book. And let me tell you, it was never the idea right in the beginning when I was writing this, the poems for this book.
This is sort of the power of poetry, right? The possibilities that to tell a story of a whole lifetime using sort of snippets, and like you kind of effectively shows the highlights, and even what you choose as highlights in your poems are something that another person would have completely erased from their own memory. It's a very subtle moments, like watching sunlight pass through windows, and watching your father at work and thinking about what he is thinking. All of these moments, these brilliant moments that you have captured, they kind of illustrate to us what you can do with poems, how you can create value using the power of poetry to all these precious moments.
Yeah,
And I would, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ashwin, it's very interesting you say that about those particular scenes, because most of his memories, they do not exist in your mind as words, right? They exist as images, as photographs, right? And there are these scenes or tableaus in your mind. You can see that someone is standing at one corner of the room. The sunlight is coming into coming through the window, probably playing on the walls or something. You see, your life and your memory is full of moments like this, certain photographic images, actually, which you run at high speed, becomes actually a movie of your life. So a lot of what I write is from memory, as you say. But while there is something like, how do you write about a memory just like that? Because you wouldn't find so many details if you look at memory firsthand, but you have to persist with a memory. And memory is a very hard customer, very tricky customer. And so often, what you think you don't remember, but you give enough time to a memory and you spend time on it, even days, you start remembering certain details, and you realize your memory is not exactly as you remember it to be, but there were so many sides to it, so many facets to it. But it is also possible that your imagination can also come into play, because sometimes you are in a rush to solve a problem. So if there is a missing piece in the jigsaw puzzle, you want to fill it in. It is the basic innate human nature to fit in the missing piece. So sometimes what happens is that in this poetry, in these poems that I write, it is also possible that I might also make up or use certain figments of imagination. You have the basic structure in place, you have the basic memory in place, you have so many details about it, and then you need to lock it in, probably using that, missing piece, as you call it. And that is often, those detailing that comes into the poem itself. Then again, this memory, the first part is to write about the memory, to describe the memory, and talk about the memory, the time in which it came to me. And sometimes the art of poetry itself will have to be compromised with, because you want to give more importance to what really happened, and try to write it as best as possible using poetry. You get me, Ashwin?
Yes, yes. The way you have to balance facts with fiction and craft with life. So there is a very fine balance. And you also talked about something that really sparks my curiosity. Something about things not being what they seem to be, things not being what they appear to be at first glance. And this is an idea I think you have played with to a very very beautiful extent in the poem Learning Malayalam, which is once again set in Manjalitara, and time stamp for 1982. This is a poem where you are looking at language in a very unique, a very Soni way. You are looking at language and the words on the page in a very beautiful, very unique way. And I would, as I mentioned before in our conversation, I would like you to talk a little bit about learning Malayalam as a poem, and also read the poem in entirety or in parts, however you like. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Ashwin, I will read probably anything that you choose. But then again, coming back to the poem, learning Malayalam, let me be very frank, it was the most fun I had in this book, actually, writing. And because you know that this idea is going to work, you know already. Then you have the challenge of writing it. Because you first have you have ideated it to a certain extent. And why this ideation? Why this ideation? Where does it come from? That is the story, actually. So, traveling around with my Air Force father, Air Force man, or what we call airman, traveling around India right from the time I was born meant that I never learned Malayalam on a formal level. So I had not written it. I had never written it. I had never read it. The only connection I had with my mother tongue was my parents and the language we spoke at home, right? So, what happened was that during one of the vacations, because I did not know how to write Malayalam or read Malayalam, just out of the blue, one day during an annual vacation, my mother sent me to a neighbor's house where there was a chechi who was teaching what do you call this aksharams to Kozhikode, who hadn't started school. I was sitting, this 9-year-old was sitting in the midst of all these little tiny thoughts, actually. And അവിടെ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഈ തറയില് നമ്മുടെ പൂഴി ചരൽ മണ്ണ് അത് ഇട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ അതിനകത്താണ് എല്ലാവരും എഴുതി പഠിക്കുന്നത്. ചില ആൾക്കാരുടെ കയ്യിൽ സ്ലേറ്റ് ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. Some people have slates also. But I had suddenly come and I was thrust into this sudden go study Malayalam. അങ്ങനെ അപ്പം സോ ഐ വാസ് എനിക്ക് മണ്ണായിരുന്നു. അപ്പം ഞാൻ മണ്ണ് വെച്ചിട്ട് എഴുതുക. അപ്പം ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് മൈ ഫസ്റ്റ് എൻകൗണ്ടർ വിത്ത് മലയാളം ആൽഫബറ്റ്. ആൻഡ് ഐ സ്റ്റാർട്ടഡ് റൈറ്റിംഗ്. എഴുതാൻ തുടങ്ങിയപ്പോഴത്തേക്കും I have traveled around. I have been to big zoos in other cities of India. And the thing is that you are so not conversant with this shape. You see it as a shape. You are not even seeing it as a letter. It is like a foreign thing to you. It is like there is a certain air of mystery to it. And because, like I said earlier, the human mind, there is this unrest which happens when you can't understand something and you want to immediately understand it and take it into your grip and own it, right? So the first way that you would probably see a flower for the first time, or that is the same thing, or probably an animal. So that is the same thing that happened to me with the alphabets of Malayalam language. I started to, compare them with shapes of animals and objects that I knew, or the kind of emotions they brought to me, or rather an experience of an object or a phenomenon or anything. So I remember doing this at that point of time. So now let's move forward to 2017 or 2016, 2017, 2018, where I'm thinking about that memory, and then I'm thinking, it's not enough that I write about the shape. I have to connect it to certain incidents in mind. So it is like you are diving deeper. So you want to do something entirely different. So at that point of time, I am unaware of the fact that in other languages of the world and alphabets of the world, people have done this experimentation. But lazy me hasn't done that. So very proudly, I write this poem and everything and all that. I'll just tell you the story of what happened later. So I am sitting with Arjun one day, and I'm like, we are editing the book before its publication. And after we are done editing this poem, he actually sends me a copy of a poem written by, I forgot the poet. So he takes this Chinese alphabet, and he's made poems out of that. So so I don't think it is an original idea, but the fact is that where it is different is that I went and connected it to certain memories. Because then again, let's remember, what was the agenda of the book? Memory, right? Yeah.
So would you like to read the poem, and do you mind if I screen share from the book?
Sure. Is there any particular one that you want, because it's a long poem, or rather a series of poems, right?
Whichever sections you would like to read. It's entirely up to you.
What is the page number? Just a moment.
Page number is 38.
Okay, found it. So you want me to read anything particular, or you want me to read the entire thing?
Start with R and read one or two other sections, whichever you would like.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I will start screen sharing.
Yeah. Let me know once that is done, then I can start reading.
Yes.
Shall I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Learning Malayalam. This is again Manyadithara, the same place where everything has happened. So 1982 is the year. I'm 9 years old and I'm learning Malayalam for the first time. So here you go, and I'm writing one of the alphabets. On the layer of sand that my forefinger parts, the curvaceous overture begins to reveal an elephant in a line drawing. I taste succulent jungle grass. Say, if I held the shell of the first alphabet close to my ear, would it be a tribute to the mammal's memory, something I need to embark on a journey of language? Aswin, if you remember, there is a reference to the first poem that we discussed.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Elephant.
Yes.
Things. Yeah.
It's also another beginning. It's also learning language. It's the beginning of the journey of learning language.
Yeah.
And
you need memory again there. If you don't have memory, it is like you are a ram, right? You are done reading for the day, and you come in back in the evening. Your total memory is, you don't remember anything at all.
Yes.
And you cannot progress because your memory is zero.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So would you like to read R as well?
R, right? Yeah. R. So we are imagining the alphabet R. In innocence, I saw only the deer's horns, doe eyes, and the tense line ready to spring and sprint away. But there is this recurring dream of a half row. Many years later, I would sense the cat in me. The cat remains asleep, just as the world desires. Be good, nice, even if it means to live a lie. The wilderness yearns to break free. The goodness at times way too nice. Is there room for a docile row, I wonder? So it was just a way of answering who I wanted to be and who I should be. And was there a middle path that I could walk? Was there a worldview that I could subscribe to, which kind of middle date or something? So that was one of the confusions of, kind of your early life. As you come you come to college and then you're going out in the world, so many of these confusions exist in your mind because somebody tells this is the best thing, then somebody else tells this is the best thing. Then there are so many examples to follow. You try to model yourself on someone because you don't know exactly, or rather you are at the point wherein you're beginning your journey of understanding yourself. So, yeah.
You're always consciously or unconsciously making that choice of what you want to be, right? Like what kind of a person you want to be in each moment.
Right.
Yeah, and
right.
Again, I feel like there is a lot of this trying to find the right balance is something that we can see in a lot of these poems, that the fine balance between the wildness and the docile. It's very well established. Can we move on to the very last section? No, and because there's another animal that I really like that you find in the words, in the letters.
Yeah. So it looks like the caterpillar, right? I mean, like, yeah, it's in the caterpillar, a ho-hum line of rowing paddles and armadas progress. No, a steam whistle that marks the genie's escape, a pugnacious spurt of coal smoke. Sunlights a speedy train, a coruscating line of beads, such a turn of phrase at the tunnel's end. Watch from afar this fleeting disembodiment, clap for the stunning overture of speed. Remove oneself the farthest to the landscape of questions, gain the hermit's advantage. What if someone kept one's ears to the rail? Would we hear a summer's day, its slow minutes clanging in the distance? Or would we count the days left to reach home? So here in this poem, what is caterpillar to me can appear as something else to someone else. So those two, the bipolarity of that phenomenon is what is presented in this. The thing about wherein it's a difference in perspective and of something that is very a particular object that may be so very clear to all of us, but surprisingly we might think differently about it, though we expect the other to think the same as us. So it is also an issue with the world, right? And expecting people to think the way that we think, or rather that big aspect of opinion, wherein opinion is only an individual it's an individual take of things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody else's opinion, and rather come together to accept that people can have different opinions and how we can exist together in accommodating all that, and not exactly destroying the other for having different thoughts or different opinions. Yeah.
That's a message for the times also, right? It's a message for our times. And
yeah, I think it is. I think I would not just take it in the aspect of politics itself, but of course, I mean everything about, even if we look at relationships, there's a certain politics to it, isn't it? And two people, let's take for example a marriage, they can be married to each other and can have totally different views. And how is it? How do we give importance to the fact that there is a relationship at stake, or do we give importance to our individual opinion? Where do we strike the balance? There are no definite answers. It's an area of gray, just like memory. Yeah.
We come back to the idea of balance once again. The world is in balance. So one more, the thing that I want to lead up to by reading this particular poem was the kind of attention that you give to language itself in this poem is something that I'm so happy to see, and something that leads up to a much uh, larger debate, larger question of what of a choice of language of expression, right?
Hmm.
And we all speak Malayalam, but we choose to read quite a bit in English. We choose to write a lot in English. So, what is your particular relationship with language? You have said you have grown up not learning Malayalam in the first few years, but then you came to Malayalam. But you also have learned other languages in the process, right? So, what is your general relationship with language, and how do you approach language in poetry and also in daily life?
Okay. It's a fairly kind of not an easy question, rather, to answer. But I would say now the fact that I learned a language first, which is English, uh, it does not give me the distance. It does not give me the distance of perspective, because I was born. That was the first thing that I started studying. But with Malayalam, there is this very interesting relationship here. My blood is Malayalam, but I am a bit of what you call, I am uh, a bit far from the center, if you would call it. Because I did not learn that language, because I did not learn, of course I speak it, but the fact that I couldn't study it in what is in terms of, say, the writing part of it or the reading part of it, which means access to it. Of course, I have taught myself to read now, which I did by myself. I taught myself to read, and therefore I can read Malayalam. I can read books, but I cannot still write. But this is my greatest regret: the fact that I am unable to do the things that I do in English in Malayalam. That is the difficulty I have with my mother tongue, that I am not able to kind of express myself or bring my my most dearest memories, which are connected, which are within me, which should find closeness to the blood that flows in me. I'm unable to say that in my mother tongue. I'm unable to write that in Malayalam. And it is a deep regret that I have. And the fact that it presents to me as something to, it is like a painting on the wall. I am part of it, but I am a spectator. I'm standing outside the circle. I'm not an insider. And that is also the kind of thought that I had when I was writing this poem, actually. And I think poetry in itself is probably the thing that has worked towards extracting new meanings for language itself, of extending the possibilities through creativity of language, of discovering, finding out what we can do, the new things that we can do with the language that we take for granted. I think poetry is the foremost force in that regard, I feel.
So, let me ask, as a poet,
but that was something, that question actually, I think it forced me to think a lot, Aswin, and I still have a lot of thinking to do in that direction. But a lot of that actually happened whatever I could say happened for this poem actually. So yeah.
Yeah, the poem, this poem especially carries a, your signature. Like there's a lot of thought that has gone into it, into that poem. And it is clearly evident that you have thought very deeply about these things. That you bring your emotion to the thought, and it's brilliant. And what I want to ask you next, as a poet, as a reader, avid reader of poetry.
Before that, I would say one thing, though, Aswin.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
My
problem.
only intention was to write for one alphabet when I started out. And then it caught me by surprise that I was looking forward. Is there any other alphabet that I can write about? Which I remember at that time looking at and seeing that there was something novel about its shape. And so it started to, kind of become not just one, it became 2, 3, then it kept going on until I had to stop myself. So that was one little, what do you call it?
Yeah, it's brilliant how how much attention that you pay to it, because without paying close attention to the shades of the alphabets itself, you could not write a poem like learning Malayalam. So that is exactly what I want to lead you to the next question, because a lot of the people listening in here are undergraduate and postgraduate students who are encountering poetry in any serious manner for the first time. At least some of them are encountering poetry in a serious manner only for the first time. They have learned or studied some poetry in school, but what is your way of approaching a poem, reading a poem, and is this something that you want younger readers to pay attention to? Is there something that you want to tell young readers about reading poetry?
Reading poetry, a lot of us, I think, in a sense, there is a certain absence of a reading culture as far as poetry is concerned, especially English poetry, because it is something we do in school and then we leave it later. And even if we do it in school, it is there is no aspect of analysis or understanding what is being done in the poem, or there is a certain amount of technique to it, which if you at least know or understand in passing, you can actually read poetry and enjoy it. So when the element of enjoyment is not there, or rather we have not been conditioned enough to read poetry in the way that it should be, then there is a reluctance to take it up. That threshold level, that thing is pretty, it remains like an inaccessible area. You tend to dismiss it away as, oh, I don't understand what they have written. So see, for example, Aswin, now at Quarantine Train, there is this thing that we learn from each other. There are so many people contribute to understanding the science of how to read poetry. Unless and until that is there, it becomes slightly difficult to approach poetry. But of course, if you are interested in reading as in general, there is more tendency in you to go and read poetry. But we should also understand that sometimes, though people may have read 1 or 2 poems here and there, or probably during the school, especially when you get into your adolescent years, especially when you're trying to understand yourself and you want to express about it, but you can't talk about it to others because you're afraid how you will be taken, there's a tendency in people to write privately what their thoughts are. And some of them become poems. The only thing here is that I don't think a lot of young poets became poets because they have had this steady culture of reading poetry. but they began writing first, actually, which is what happened to me in the first place. So the year when I had finished my 12th standard, I was also diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, which is a degenerative disorder, which has no cure. And since I had plans to join the armed forces, I immediately understood that I was not going to have my ambition met. So it was a period of deep disappointment. And I remember I had passed out of 12th standard, and I had no idea how I would get on without having the major ambition of my life, actually achieved or anything. So that was a moment of despair. And I remember going to one day my father took me to the beach. So I was back from school, so I wasn't staying at home. And I had gone to the beach. And there at the beach, I'm watching these things. I'm watching what's happening with the water. And I have no idea. When I got back home, I had this deep urge to start writing. And I wrote. So nothing spectacular, but that I wanted to write. You understand what I'm talking about? That desire to write, that feeling that you had to express what you were feeling. So though of course, again, it is not necessary that you should have that strong feeling to write, but you can start writing poetry. Simply, like we said earlier, because we read poetry, we can start writing poetry. And I think there is no other way than to, get into poetry by writing and writing and writing about what you see, what you encounter, what you feel. And meanwhile, reading poetry also and telling yourself that, okay, somebody has expressed this in this way. Is there my way of describing the world I see? Can I do it in a better way than I have already done? So I've written this line. Can I write a line? I'm not saying necessarily better, but can I write a line that is different from this, that is uncommon? Can I put it in a new way? Can I put it in a creative way? Can I do it differently? So that's my take, actually. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. So what you were talking about towards the end of that particular answer, that's quite curious, right? Some of the best lines that we read come not when somebody is trying to write their best line, but it comes when they are trying to do something different. They are trying to do something out of the ordinary for themselves, and it comes out so surprising. It comes out so new to the reader as well. So this is kind of applicable to a lot of things that we pursue. It is good to strive to be best, but also letting out our creativity, just trying out things that we want to try out. That can be very helpful, right?
But the thing is, Aswin, what I feel is that you write differently comes only after that kind of thought process comes only later, a bit later. First, initially, it is a sort of because you have the hangover of your real life. There are certain materialistic ways in which you look at poetry. Okay, the sense of achievement, whether I want to win the first prize in that competition, rather the worldly way of writing poetry. So all this kind of you come with this hangover, and then you get into poetry, and you try to do all that with the same mindset that you have left behind, or which is behind you, or rather, representative of the real world, or the practical world, as we call it. But it is only later that you begin to think that, okay, writing is about not being the best around when compared to those around you, but it is more about how much better it can be than what you have already expressed. You're only, if at all we were to put it in the sense of competition, The competition is with you. But it is only way later that we realize that initially it is competition with the world.
Absolutely. Agree. So you are this is well known to us who have been part of the quarantine train, but not as much to those others. I don't think you have talked about this aspect of your creative life in many other outlets. I would like you to talk a little bit about your creative expression in other forms. Like you like a little bit of designing and other things. You dabble in those sort of things, and you are really good at it. At a sort of visual storytelling, telling stories through images. You're quite good at it, and you have been doing that for the quarantine train for the past year. And how do you approach that? How much time do you invest in it? How much do you you know? What is your background in that? I would love to know more about it.
Yeah. See, who would have thought about the word invest in a session on poetry, right? So, circles back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So, but I have to say something here that of my pastime, whether it's photography or whether it's designing or whether it's my poetry, there is a sense of graphical to it, actually, if you look at it very closely. So when I say graphical, so I like to, when I'm writing poetry, I increasingly see that I see things in my mind. It is not like how I see it in words. I see the image in my mind. And that's what I'm writing about. I immediately conjure up a scene in my mind, and I'm describing that scene on the page, which is which makes me realize, though I cannot draw at all or sketch to save my life, I understand that my outlook towards the world has a certain graphic way of looking, and I know what is a good design when I see it. So I realized, especially when it comes to designing, if somebody could give me tools that would enable me to draw a perfect circle, or not, I mean, like, I cannot draw a circle, but if they could give me tools to, kind of ready-made tools to put these shapes in place, and also had some sense of design integrity to it, I would be able to create a design, probably maybe not as good as a professional designer, but something that I would love to see in design. So there is this tool called Canva, which I am pretty sure most of you know about, because it's made, not just the fact that it has made a lot of designers put them out of their job or get those small gigs, which would get them money. Rather, it has come to amateurs like us to actually use the power of Canva to create acceptable designs. So knowing what is rather instinctively recognizing what is a good design helps me to create new designs in Canva, because there are templates, and then it's a matter of understanding what is pleasing to the eye. You learn it over a period of time. I have been using Canva for 6 years now, if I remember right. Yeah, yes, 6 years. So that experience has given me a certain, what is it you call, a certain specialization in designing as a non-designer. Yeah, that is how I would term myself. When it comes to photography, pardon?
That's where I wanted you to go to, photography as well. Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to ask you.
Yeah, so and then coming to photography, again, most often there is this image. So it may be the result of seeing so many million photographs in our lifetime and seeing what is a good photo, understanding and recognizing what is a good photo. So most of the time, I want to recreate a moment like that. So it is not just about taking a particular frame, but also what I do with it in terms of changing its light, changing its tones, changing its hue to get a particular imaginary scene that I have in my mind. So when I see a flower or a particular scene, and I see that I experiment with various angles, and then I see which is the best way to kind of express that particular scene. I photograph it, and then I try to bring in the light that the way I see it in my mind. So it's like a poetry with photography. You understand that you are actually manipulating the medium to arrive at a kind of look that you have seen in your mind. You understand what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. This sort of an overlap of the poetry, the poetic aesthetic and the visual aesthetic. That the two different kinds of storytelling that you employ. This comes together almost perfectly in First Contact as a collection, because you have used your own photographs very throughout the collection. You have used a lot of your own photographs to supplement the stories that are being told through your words. And I think it's a brilliant
I lost you, Ashwin.
way of bringing together
previous
these
sentence.
two sorts of aesthetics, the two different
Ashwin,
ways
I
of
lost
telling
your previous
your
sentence.
stories.
Yeah. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, so I was trying to say, hello.
You're asking?
Oh, sorry. So what I was trying to say is that I was trying to say that the way you bring together the two different aesthetics of this of stories through images and stories through words. This kind of plays out perfectly in First Contact. And I was wondering if you would like to tell us a little bit more about that overlap, specifically about your choices in making First Contact look the way it does.
Yeah. So as far as the book was concerned, because I said earlier that there is this certain sensitivity to good design and thing, I was very particular that I wanted my book to look in a certain way, that it would deeply depend on colors that reminded you of memory. So if you look at the car, the colors of the car. Do you have the cover with you right now, Ashwin? Ashwin? Okay, so I'll go on. So what happened with the book is that so there was a certain look that I wanted, and I had seen that my publisher, Red River, produces beautiful books, and I had seen a couple of my friends publish with Red River, and I felt that my poems would find a good home in the kind of books that they designed. And that was the reason why I chose Red River to actually, or rather, Dibya Jyoti, the publisher at Red River, actually had the same aesthetic. We agreed on the aesthetic sense that books should have, and that is how the book came to be. So we had so many cover images and all that we went through, cycled through. But the moment I saw this particular cover of the mountain and the people around it, I knew instantly that this was how it was going to be. Inside the page itself, the paper, there was a certain feel which I wanted, and that slightly thickish sort of a rough paper that rough texture that I wanted. So, and the choice of font and so there was a lot of room to think and room to experiment, and that's what I liked about publishing at Red River. And of course, the images inside, these were all photographs which were already taken and were not particularly photographed for the book as such. So they had been in existence long, for like at least some of the photographs were at least taken 2 or 3 years before I started writing the book itself. So we chose some of the photographs that would make sense. For example, like Kovalam, its scenes of Kovalam, and certain what do you call nature photos that would go along so well. Then we also chose the painting to go with the particular poem that talks about that painting, Hunters in the Snow by Bruegel. So, yeah, so this was the general aesthetic thought that we had while we were designing that book itself. Ashwin.
Yeah, so I mean, so
Is
and
there any
I'm
particular part of the question that I have not answered?
no, not at all. I'm slightly unhappy that you did not mention the one of the most fabulous images that you have included in this, which is a cover image of Amar Chitragatha. This one image that you have here. This is so fantastic, and it also is you know, facing the poem which talks about the same scene that you have that is captured in that sort of image. It's quite brilliant. The way it all works together, the harmony of it all is quite brilliant. And you mentioned the Peter Bruegel image, which is I absolutely love the way you have approached that particular poem from all the different perspectives possible in that image stilled by time. That sort of thing. It kind of reminded me of the Grecian urn, where you are looking at that particular Sylvan scene from the perspective of different entities involved in that particular image. So it felt quite reminiscent of that sort of an image. And I would like to now come to almost the conclusion of this, question and answer session with you, this conversation with you, by asking you something that everybody has been asking everybody else, right? So what have you been doing during the pandemic? How has the pandemic affected you? And also in terms in the times of pandemic, what has been poetry's role for you personally?
Okay, the pandemic had the biggest surprise for me, just like for anyone else, though it was not in the physical form or anything like that. I had, in fact, I lost my job within 1 month of the pandemic starting. So I lost my job in the sense that I was consulting with a MNC, and I lost that opportunity because they were mostly into the food business, the restaurant business, and then they had to shut shop because of the pandemic and the resultant containment rules. So I remember totally tuning out, and until that time, I was occupied. Until that I lost the job, I was occupied fully, like working for the huge, what is it you call, the commercial machine, as we call it, or the capitalist machine, as we call it. So it is still a wonder to me how I finished this book. But the thing is that I felt stunned for a moment, not just for a moment, but almost for a month. And I was watching this mindless TV and wondering what to do. And suddenly I had all the 12 working hours or 10 working hours that I did every day was suddenly free to me, available to me, and I had no idea what to do about it. I tried reading books, and I realized I have lost my attention span. So it is there is an irony to it. I spent a lot of time at work and at concentrating and focusing on so many things. I can hold my attention there and do good work. But I was trying to read a book. The thing that I really love, the thing that is my most favorite thing is reading. and trying to read a book was not possible. It is only later I realized that I was also tense and it had walked into me. The pandemic and its enormity, its certain assault mode, the assault mode of it had slowly walked inside me without even my knowledge, and it had ripped my innards apart and had taken away all sense of security from inside me, and I was just a shell, and I was not even realizing that I was a shell. So about a month later, I just started thinking about, so what happened is that I live in a, what do you call, a community here of houses, and we have these roads inside. And suddenly, because of all the containment rules, no vehicles were operating. And suddenly, I found that the roads were empty and that I could actually take out my automatic wheelchair out into the street and do something that I hadn't done in years. And suddenly this exposure to something that I hadn't done set me thinking about a lot of things that I could possibly do. And then I saw that there was this, what do you call, manuscript, which I had already gotten into the edit mode with Arjun, my dear friend. And I quickly used the time to put the collection together into its final form. And something that had taken nearly 4 years to, at least 3 years to, 3 to 4 years to write, or at least think about, had put itself together in the matter of 2 months. That's what COVID did for me, despite the initial surprise that it gave me. And the book was ready. I sent it to the publisher, and just in under 2 months, by September, it was out there in the world. And then you get to see how it goes out there, and it's completely gone out of your control altogether. And it takes its own life, and people tell you so many things, and you expect the book to behave in a particular way. It doesn't. It takes a life of its own and behaves in a way that it wants to. And I must admit that I thought it would be a quiet thing, but it gained a voice of its own. And at this point of time, it seems still pretty difficult to believe. And I think that is the most positive thing that came out of the pandemic for me. And let me also tell you that while it has been very unsettling for a lot of people to be confined to homes, suddenly, against your will, and forced to get into each other's personal space more than ever before. One aspect of it was that at least for the last 15 years of my life, I have been in a state of self-quarantine. Against my choice, not able to go out or enjoy the world, external world as much as I want to. So once the pandemic came in, I think I was the only person who was probably not feeling strange, because this has been in my life for so many years, much more than I can remember. So it has been one of the major problems of or one of the major disadvantages of the pandemic was lost on me because I had already experienced it. Yeah.
You talked about your book as possibly going out in the world as a quiet thing, but it has been exactly the opposite. It has made quite the ruckus. It's been a noisy thing. It's something that we have been talking about for about a year now, over a year now. We have been talking about it. We've been discussing it, and it has impacted us, like the readers, in a big way. And I think you have heard back enough from the readers to know that yourself, that it has made a huge impact on its arrival. And the first contact between Soni Somarajan, the poet, and a lot of the readers out there who are waiting for something like this. It has happened. It has taken a lot of years. It has been a lot of years in the making, and it has finally come out. And a lot of us are very happy to have this in our hands and to read it, and also to have you on, in places like this, talking about your craft, talking about the craft in general, talking about poetry in general, and what it can offer all of us. So before I conclude, I have one last request. Before I open this up to the general audience for questions, I have one last request for you, which is to read something new to us, something that you have written after the publication of First Contact. And if you don't mind, talk a little bit about that. About what you're doing currently.
Yeah, just a moment. Give me a minute. 1 minute. I have put it in a folder somewhere here, and I'm just trying to find out where it is. Just 1 second. Matter of fact is, I think I've shied away from writing as much as possible after the book came out, and how I've been told and advised that you should start working on your next collection as soon as possible without sitting on it or whatever. But I've chosen to sit down for a bit. So,
but I'm sure you have not entirely moved away from poetry, because I know it, as a fact you can't. You have been writing, I'm sure. What have you been thinking about? What are the themes of things that you've been thinking about post the book?
I think memory still continues to be a major turn on, as you would call it, and I have been looking at that aspect as well, and also trying to write about the importance of places, which of course I have mentioned, which I've written about in the first book, but I'm still fascinated by. There are so many things that I've left unsaid in the first book, and that is something that I still want to pursue. And
Have you found the home?
yeah, I'm just looking at it.
Still trying to, okay.
Would you like me to read Shadow Play, which appeared in Madras Courier?
Please go ahead. Yes, sure.
Yeah. Shadow Play is what Onam, or what rather the my childhood memories of Onam are. So Aswin, in those times, the load shedding, and was like a major event. And I remember it used to happen the same time every day in the evening. So it would be like half an hour or 1 hour. So I actually have seen that, I mean, like, I know that we don't have load shedding or anything, but I wish it would come back, because then people will be forced out of their rooms and come and talk to each other. So yeah, that is there. So shadow play was written actually to in remembrance of the Onam, when there was load shedding as well. So once Onam, only on the days of Onam, we wouldn't have load shedding, but the days leading to it, we would have it. But since it was a festival, they would kind of give you an exemption during the days. But here it is, shadow play. Those 4 days of Onam, the elders stretched their afternoon game of cards into the night, as the monsoon suspended its play. We cousins, 13 of us, dampened by what low voltage does to a Siemens Vijayan, missed the load shedding of the early days, when we became such blacksmiths of light, as our palms practiced magic, moving on well-oiled joints, shifting, conjuring up antelopes, bears, dogs, cats, and whales, enchanting a lantern light to do our bidding, making younger ones squeal in delight, even as monsoon held back its applause, afraid that clapping its wet hands would be some sort of an ill omen.
Here you have been even further into that sort of memory and images that are conjured up in memory. Thank you, Soni. Let me thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me in such an enriching conversation for me to be able to talk to you. This is something that we have done before, but never in the view of others. But we have been talking about each other's craft and how we approach craft before, and I am very happy to have done that here on this particular platform. Thank you for joining us here at LITmus Talks. And if you don't mind, I'm going to open the virtual space for any questions that our audience might have. We are happy to take questions.
Thank you, Aswin. Thank you, Aswin, for this wonderful conversation. You are a very close friend, and I'm sure that has helped to ask these questions, which has made me delve so deeper and even go to areas which I've never thought of before. But in this process, actually clarifying a lot of things to myself, and I feel that the hallmark of a true conversation is always that, isn't it? That we expand our vision, expand our playground of thought, and be able to look at so many new things in the light that we shed upon each other. So I felt I have to say to the students especially that Aswin is a huge star for us at the quarantine train, and you are so lucky to have him for a teacher. I think you should definitely go and kind of poke him in case you harbor any sort of poetic ambition in you, and go poke him. Do that, because once he starts opening up about the unique world that he is audience to, it is a huge learning experience for all of us.
Thank you, Soni, for that generous word. So we are open for questions, and if anybody has any questions, any comments, any rejoinders, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, raise your voice, please. We'll be glad to hear from others. We have few comments, Soni, in the chat box, if you haven't seen it already. Vinita Mekot has been...
Yeah, happy to see her here. Such a close friend. And oh yes, Sainab, the wonderfully talented Sainab is here. So happy to see her here as well. And I think Shivakami ma'am is here too.
Yes, Shivakami ma'am has been here throughout the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, what a support to us. What a support to all of us. And yeah, thankful to all who have come here today. Is there a question that is being fielded?
Soni, good morning. This is Chandran here. I have a question for you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible. Please speak. Yes.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Aswin,
yeah. Can you please throw some light on actually on what happens the moment an idea strikes you and you start putting pen to paper, and the process, and then what happens when finally it's done? There's a range of emotions that you go through. I think when you start, you do not know what the end would be, but then it evolves and it takes shape. Can you just take us through your journey of taking any one poem, any one of these poems, which
sir, I can talk about two phases. That is my early life as a poet and what it is right now. So if I describe both, then it becomes fairly easy how my creative process is. So initially, when I used to write poetry, it was like it would come to me. I would something would strike me, and then I would start writing about it immediately because I was afraid I would lose the thread of thought, and I would start writing it as instantaneously as possible, and just like in a matter of like a few minutes, it's done. And it was also my great addiction to put it up immediately on Facebook and enjoy the various little likes and I mean, the hearts were not there at that point of time, but enjoy the little bit of fame that lasts for 5 minutes, or the small bit of fame that comes on Facebook along with the congratulatory messages. But what happened is that later I started thinking that there is an aspect called editing also to poetry, and that you can actually bring more coherence to your idea of the poem, that you can make it that there is a structure behind the thought that you have written, and that you can actually work on it to make the poem and its words really carry their weight. So that this is possible, but that is happening after my initial days actually. So one thing that was very crucial to developing this thought was my attending the University of Iowa's program in 2013, wherein I suddenly came into contact with people who were quite serious about their poetry. There were people who had made a career out of it, and I was listening to voices from around the world and closely see their process of creation. So here was our teacher who was telling us, please try and use this method to try and write a poem. So I was exposed to so many things in which there were so many possibilities to poetry than look at it with a blinkered view. So nowadays, this is how it works for me. I don't write every day, but I really am envious of people who can write every day and write good poems. If I tried that, I would probably write, I don't know. I haven't thought about that at all. But now when that thought comes to me, I'm not afraid that it will go away from my mind. The poem starts to compose in my mind. I let it stay there. And I let it stay there for a few days before I even begin to write. So, when I'm thinking about a particular thing and it is telling me various things about revealing itself to me, as the process of revealing happens, some of the thoughts, I'll get a whole line as such. for that particular thing. It will be a single thought in one single line. I mean, like these are what you call the those special lines in a poem. And earlier, I have often been told that a great poem is not about great lines in the entire poem. It is about having one great line in a poem. The rest is all revolving around it and building towards it, or maybe it could be the first line of the poem itself, and everything else is supporting it, or something like that. So I don't know how it works for others, but this has happened that it is when I feel that I'm now ready to put it on paper that I start filing the thoughts into it. So initially on the page, I write down. It's like to borrow something from the corporate world that I also work in. I put bullet points and I write out the most strongest thoughts of what I'm trying to write about. And you know what happens after you start writing. You don't know what happens. But you are writing it and the poem is composing itself in that sense. It is not like we are saying that I'm saying that there is something superhuman happening here. But it is that I think it is probably that the brain starts to probably secrete some chemical of creativity and goes into this wonderful mush that it makes you totally unconscious of what you're doing, and without that conscious, there will be certain consciousness, but even then it makes you do things. But once you have finished written, I let it stay for a few days, or maybe depending. So then I come and take a fresh look as an editor at it. And then to make that job easier, in case anyone of you here writes serious or rather any poetry, you find people like Aswin to edit your poem. You invite, you ask them for their opinion. So they immediately bring you down to earth while you were thinking that your specially crafted poem was something God sent. So then you bring in the voice of reason into that, so that it improves the readability of the poem. That is a responsibility. Now, none of this is being looked at from the reader's perspective of view, reader's viewpoint, because no matter what you do, you can only influence the reader to some extent, because the reader will find their own meaning in what you have written. The poem will entirely take a different journey altogether in somebody else's mind. But once you have published your book or published your poem somewhere else, a lot of people are going to come and tell you about what they thought about the poem and what they found the meaning was. And that's when you realize that your poem is punching way above its weight, that it's doing things that you never thought it would, and that that is when you start to marvel at the power of poetry itself, to become particular to a person's case and derive meaning for them. Does that answer your question, sir?
Absolutely. Thank you, One, for that wonderful explanation of the process. Thank you, Soni. Just one more thing, to connect. As a child in a village, I always used to marvel at the rhythmic movement of these millipedes going along.
Sir, come again, repeating?
Repeating. You must remember, you may recall the millipedes that used to exist in our childhood. They are no longer there now. The rhythmic movement of their feet, of their little ones, that used to be, such a joy to watch. And when you wrote about caterpillar today, when you spoke about caterpillar today, it's that image that came to mind. One. Number two, thank you, Aswin, and thank you, Guruvayurappan College, for organizing this wonderful session. It's been a treat. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being an enthusiastic participant in this session. Soni, when you talked about that particular thing, right, that particular moment of inspiration where you do not know what is happening, I think it is something akin to what a sportsman feels when they are supposedly in the zone, a sort of an undescribable space where they are performing so incredibly well that you don't. It is a result of years and years of practice. It is a result of their extreme concentration. It is a result of factors of actual conscious work, but there is something that overtakes you at that particular moment when you are in the zone and you're producing something marvelous to behold, something that cannot be expressed in words. Uh,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that is something. It is probably not divine, but still something not easily expressed in words.
Yeah. And when it comes to this particular term, in the zone, you and me, we will both agree about the fact that it became synonymous to us, that particular phrase, because I think we both watch cricket, and Steve O was the person who was always spoken about as in the zone. His ability to play an innings when it was really needed, and that too very long innings, which would just take the game away from the opponent's hands. And though I think, I think, in a sense, I think writing a poem is also a certain, I wouldn't say conflict, but I would say that it's like scaling a peak or something like that. And you call upon all your experience and your conditioning as well, and your memories and your knowledge of the world, all the good and bad things in you. And it all comes together in this wonderful combination, like I said, that sweet mush of chemicals that push you to a certain state where, yeah.
And then it just happens. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to ask. I saw some unmuted conversations, unmuted mics earlier when Maljan sir was asking the question. If somebody else wanted to, please.
Are there students here who write poetry?
That's the question we have, guys. Arya,
Arya,
Yes,
very
yes.
happy to see you.
Good
Finally,
afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We haven't spoken
Okay.
before, right? Yeah.
Yeah, correct. So first of all, I thank you for being part of our LITmus Talks. Actually, your talk was so genuine, original. It was so authentic. You related it to your life's experiences, and I feel so happy that I've been listening to you for the past 2 hours. So you begin your talk actually mentioning about the fine line between imagination and memory. So the crucial division between truth and fantasy. It was really nice that I feel memories are conjunctions between life and death, between past and present. So we can really see that wheel of memory moving in your lines while you were reciting some of your poems. So we can smell that organic memory growing and aging with us. So as implied readers, so when I go through your poems, I feel them as reportages, especially that book reportages, highly subjective. And
Yeah.
accidentally, as a answer to Aswin's question, you said about your interest in graphic designing, photography, etc. So they are also photographic reportages, and I felt a kind of a resemblance to the autobiography of Roland Barthes, and that autobiography itself is titled as Roland Barthes. So Barthes actually provides a kind of an objective point of view of life by mixing up or structuring his book with lots of photographs and photographic footages, etc. But your work is highly subjective because it is, your lines are highly subjective, I felt. And in a poem, a titled, I think, how you mentioned how you studied Malayalam language. I felt it really interesting because for me, language, especially Malayalam language, is a kind of an emotional state. I cannot define it. A kind of an emotional reaction, the most normal thing in life. I feel that language is something real, and I am unreal. Uh, a kind of a normal, abnormal kind of a paradox. And I felt one of your two of your lines. My inheritance is an absence of certainty, silence that takes shape as poetry. So here you try to define what is poetry to you, and I feel that I can associate to your empathetic words what you have been saying for the last 2 hours. So it's not a question. It's just a kind of a silly inquiry that does writing energize you or exhaust you? Because you have been describing the creative process uh, to the question what Balachandran sir now asked. So does writing energize you or it exhausts you?
Mm, uh, uh, like I said, I don't write daily. Okay. And I have found myself only writing when a thought strikes me, and they are far and fewer. So even though there are 64 poems in the book, it took me 4 or 5 years to actually write all that. So and I published my first book at this age. Okay, so which people tend to do when in their late 20s or something like that. So for me, I'm okay to wait. Okay, and I'm fine waiting. And I also, let me tell you, I don't enjoy writing, and I don't enjoy writing in the sense that I don't know who says that it is such an enjoyable process. I know that by some chance, writing Malayalam gave me some joy. But when I say joy, it's a different kind of joy. It's not exactly joy, but rather the challenge of it. So there was this high testosterone sort of a thing. But here, not adrenaline. I'm not talking about testosterone, adrenaline. So I would rather wait for a poem to happen, and I'm happy to write a poem and get it out of my way. So I'm probably the most laziest writer or poet you would probably. And I don't respond very well to prompts. You know prompts, right? Poetry prompts. So I don't respond very well because most of the things I have written only because I felt strongly about something. The thought came to me, and I understood that this is a poem. Okay, this is a poem that I wrote. So that is how it has worked for me. I don't know whether this is normal behavior.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I'm a huge fan of yours, Arya, and I've been reading your poems. Huge fan.
Thank you, sir.
So shall
Ashwin, do we
move
have more questions?
Soni? Yeah.
Do we have more questions?
Yeah. Let's see if there is any more question. We'll take that one last question. We'll draw this.
Yeah.
Anyone?
Sainab says that the Pixar movie Soul has a lovely depiction of the zone. Yeah.
Anyway,
I would also take this opportunity to tell the students that Ashwin must have told you about Quarantine Train, where it is a place where real democracy flourishes, and there every poet is welcome to come and participate, and those of you, especially those who are starting out, will definitely have their hands held. Will find a lot of hand holding, especially from poets who are down the path, who have some sort of experience. So this is also, we would definitely love to see any one of you who wants to take advantage of the kind of atmosphere, the atmosphere of poetry, the community of poetry, of not having to think that you are alone in writing poetry. So if anyone of you wants to, then you should take advantage of that. So your teacher is very much there. So yeah.
So Vivek, back over to you.
Vivek, I think your mic is mute.
Can't hear you, Vivek, for some reason. No. Akhila, could you possibly bring us to the conclusion?
Yes, sir. I would like to invite for the vote of thanks, Devika.
Good morning. Here we had a webinar Litmus Talk, which is a new initiative of our department in association with the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of College, which conducts a series of lectures titled Litmus Talks, which was inaugurated by inaugural talk of Sir Sri Sajay KV in the first session and Dr. Anita Ramesh during the second talk. I want to thank everyone who's gathered here in this third session, and we'll be looking forward for more sessions like these. So to begin with, I want to thank Soni Somarajan sir, who's an editor, copywriter, and content consultant. His poetry and writings are featured in various magazines, newspaper, including Bombay Literary Magazine, Northeast Review, Marie Claire, and many more. His first contact debut book of poetry was published by Red River in 2020. Thank you so much, sir, for giving your time. I want to thank our beloved principal, Rajni ma'am, for being a great support to us. I want to thank Rekha ma'am, our HOD, who's a scholar and who's also had a great impact in encouraging us. And I want to thank our teachers, whose efforts all need a new introduction. And finally, our fellow students for joining this session. Thank you.
Thank you also to all the students who have been, very, very helpful in coordinating and also conducting this session. Once again, thank you.